It was one of those evenings where the silence feels heavier than usual. The kind that settles into the walls after years of living alone. I'd finished dinner, reheated stew from the night before, and was half watching an old documentary on public television. The house was dim, except for the flickering blue glow of the TV and the hum of the fridge down the hall. I remember glancing at the clock. 9:47 p.m. That's when I heard it. The knock. 3 sharp raps against the front door. Not hesitant, not aggressive, just deliberate. At first, I thought it might be one of the neighbors, maybe Alan from next door needing help with his car again. But something in the sound made my stomach tighten. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. Just the wind pressing against the windows. Then another knock, softer this time. I got up, my knees cracking, and crossed the living room. Through the frosted glass of the door, I saw a shadow. Broad shoulders, still, waiting. I turned the handle. A man stood there, early 30s maybe, beard patchy and unkempt, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were worn, travel-stained. But it wasn't his appearance that froze me. It was his eyes, brown with a faint green ring around the iris. The same as my son's. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I meant. He swallowed hard, tears gathering in the corners of those too familiar eyes. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "It's me. It's Aaron." For a moment, the world narrowed to that single word, Aaron. My mind stumbled, trying to place it somewhere rational, but it couldn't. My son, Aaron Weston, had been dead for 20 years. I buried him myself. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out something, a worn silver keychain shaped like a compass. My compass. The one I gave Aaron for his 15th birthday the week before the accident. "You gave me this," he said quietly. "For the lake trip." I couldn't breathe. The keychain glinted under the porch light, scratched but unmistakable. "How? Where did you get that?" My voice trembled. "Dad," he whispered again. "It's me." And then, as if my body no longer belonged to me, I stepped back and let him in. The day we buried Aaron was the hottest of that summer. The kind of heat that makes your clothes cling and your thoughts blur. The accident had happened 3 days earlier, the 18th of July, 2005, a boating trip with his friend Tyler and Tyler's father. They'd gone out on Lake Reece just before dusk. The police said there was an explosion, that fuel fumes must have ignited when Tyler's dad tried to start the engine. The boat burned fast, the fire spreading across the water like spilled paint. They found 2 bodies. One was beyond recognition, the other identified as Tyler's father. The smaller body, they told us, was Aaron. Dental records confirmed it. That was supposed to be the end of it. Closed casket, quick service. "It's better this way," the funeral director had said gently. But it didn't feel better. It didn't feel real. Linda, my wife at the time, fell apart before my eyes. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, sat for hours, staring at the empty chair at the dinner table. I tried to hold things together, tried to keep teaching, to keep functioning. But every night I'd walk past Aaron's room and feel that same punch in the gut. The smell of his shampoo still clung to his pillow for weeks. The police called it an accident. Everyone moved on eventually, except me. There were things that never sat right. The autopsy report mentioned a healed fracture on the right forearm. Aaron never broke his arm. Not once. I asked the coroner if it could be a mistake. "Records can be off," he'd said, distracted, already closing the file. But the doubt stayed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay the scene in my head. The lake, the explosion, the call from the RCMP, the drive to the morgue where they showed me a photograph instead of a body. I'd signed the paperwork anyway. Numb, Because what else was I supposed to do? Linda left a year later. Said the house was haunted by memories. Said I was, too. She wasn't wrong. I packed Aaron's things into boxes, sealed them, and told myself to let go. But you don't really let go of your child. You just bury the ache under routine until the years smooth it out. At least, that's what I thought until last night, when someone knocked on my door and said my son's name. We stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, both of us caught in some impossible standoff between memory and disbelief. I told him to come inside, mostly because my legs were shaking and I needed to sit down. He hesitated, then stepped over the threshold, glancing around the house like it was sacred ground. His eyes moved across the family photos on the mantel, the faded wallpaper, the dent in the coffee table where Aaron had once dropped a hammer while trying to fix it at 10 years old. "You haven't changed much," he said softly. The words hit like a hammer. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. "Really?" He smiled. Small, tired, almost apologetic. "It's me, Dad. Aaron. Don't you recognize me?" I didn't answer. Instead, I tested him, reaching for details no stranger could guess. "What was our dog's name?" I asked. "Buster," he said without hesitation. "You got him when I was 7. He chewed through 3 leashes before you gave up and let him sleep inside." I tried again. "What did you do every time there was thunder?" "I hid in the hallway closet," he said, a faint smile flickering. "You used to sit outside the door with a flashlight and tell me stories until it passed." My breath caught. "And what did I call you when you'd fall asleep in the truck?" He looked down, voice trembling. "Ace. Because I'd always fall asleep before we got home, but you said I never missed a landing." The room spun. That nickname was ours. No one else ever knew it. I studied him in the lamplight. The same mole near his ear. The scar under his chin from the skateboarding accident. Even the way he rubbed his thumb against his palm when nervous. He was older, rougher, but undeniably familiar. Still, there was something behind his eyes, something hollow, fractured. "If you're really Aaron," I said quietly, "where have you been all this time?" He looked up, and for the first time, I saw tears streak down his face. "I wish I knew," he whispered. "But maybe I can tell you what I remember." He sat at the kitchen table while I made coffee, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. His voice was low, careful, like each word was being pulled from a place deep inside him. "I woke up in a hospital in Seattle 2 months ago," he began. "They said I'd been hit by a car while crossing a street downtown. No ID, no wallet, nothing. Just clothes that didn't fit and scars that didn't make sense." He paused, staring into the steam from his mug. "The nurse said I kept saying one word while I was out, Michael. And sometimes, Dad. They thought maybe it was my name or someone I knew. When I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. Not even how old I was. And now?" I asked. "Bits and pieces," he said. "A lake. Fire. Screaming. Then water closing in. After that darkness." He rubbed the back of his neck. "The doctors called it retrograde amnesia. They gave me a discharge slip, a voucher for a shelter, and that was it. I kept dreaming about the name Michael. It felt safe, like it meant home. So I started looking." He reached into his jacket pocket and slid out a folded paper. "There are 23 Michael Westons in British Columbia. I went through each one until I found you." I unfolded the list, covered in handwritten notes, phone numbers crossed out. My name circled at the bottom. "I didn't know what I'd find," he said quietly. "But when I saw your picture on the old school district website, something inside me just clicked, like a door opening. I wanted to speak but couldn't." He looked at me then, eyes wet and pleading. "I don't remember the last 20 years, Dad. But I know one thing for sure. I didn't die on that lake. And whoever told you I did, They were wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the stubble, the tired lines, the eyes that could have been lifted straight from an old photograph. By morning, I'd made up my mind. We're getting answers, I told him. He didn't ask where we were going, just nodded, like he trusted me completely. The drive to the lab took an hour. A sterile, anonymous place tucked between a dentist's office and a payday loan center. The woman at reception barely looked up when I said, "We need a DNA comparison." She handed us forms. 2 cheek swabs, signatures, a promise of results in 48 hours. It took 5 minutes. The longest 5 minutes of my life. I watched the technician seal the samples, label them, and disappear through a door marked, "Authorized personnel only." After that, there was nothing left to do but wait. Those 2 days crawled. Aaron, if that's who he was, stayed in the guest room. I caught myself hovering, watching him the way I used to when he was a teenager, trying to read his mood from the way he sat or breathed. The habits were still there. He fidgeted with his thumbs when thinking, hummed softly under his breath when nervous. There was a faint scar behind his right ear. One I remembered from the time he fell off his bike and split the skin on a mailbox corner. I asked him to write something, just his name. His handwriting slanted the same way, the loop on the A closing too tightly. Every small detail chipped away at my doubt. But belief is a fragile thing. It needed proof. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the same cold coffee for an hour, when the phone rang. "Mr. Weston?" a woman's voice said. "We have your results." My heart stopped. The probability of a biological relationship is 99.9%. The words barely registered. "So, he's my son?" I asked. "Yes, sir," without question. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I remember hearing Aaron's footsteps before I could even look up. He crouched beside me, confusion written across his face. "Dad?" he asked. I couldn't speak. I just reached for him, my body shaking as I pulled him into my arms. For 20 years, I'd carried a grave in my heart. And now, somehow, my son was alive. It took him a full day to start talking about it, like the truth was a wound that needed time to reopen. We sat outside on the porch, the afternoon sun filtering through the cedar trees. He stared at the horizon for a long time before he began. "I remember waking up in a cabin," he said quietly. "Wood walls, cold floor, smell of gasoline. My head hurt so bad I could barely move. There was a man sitting beside the bed. He said his name was Rick. He swallowed hard. He told me my family was gone. Said there'd been a fire, that nobody made it out. I didn't even know who he was talking about. But when I asked who I was, he said my name didn't matter anymore. Rick kept him hidden, moving every few months logging camps, small towns, back roads. He said he was protecting me," Aaron continued. "Said people would come looking, that I was better off forgotten. But the truth was darker. Rick never let him near a phone or a city. He controlled everything: what Aaron ate, when he slept, where he went. Years blurred into each other. Sometimes he'd disappear for days. I think he was running jobs, maybe something illegal. When he came back, he'd act like nothing happened. I stopped asking questions. Aaron said he tried to leave once, maybe 5 years after the accident. Rick caught him packing a bag. The beating that followed left him half-conscious for days. After that, I didn't try again," he said. "But I never stopped thinking about the water, the sound of the explosion. I'd dream about it. I'd see a man reaching for me, screaming my name. He pressed his hands to his temples. I think that was you." He finally escaped when Rick fell ill. He got sick, real sick, fever, coughing blood. One night I woke up, and he was gone. Just Gone. I walked until my legs gave out. Ended up hitching rides, sleeping under bridges. I didn't know who I was. I just knew I wasn't supposed to be alive. As he spoke, the weight of it all settled between us. 20 years stolen. 20 years of silence, fear, and survival. When he finally looked up at me, his voice was barely a whisper. I think I forgot how to be a person, Dad. I reached across the table and took his hand. Then we'll start over, I said. Together. I couldn't let it rest. The police had called Aaron's story extraordinary, but I'd lived too long with unanswered questions to rely on faith alone. I needed facts, proof, something solid to explain how my son had vanished from a burning lake and ended up in the hands of a stranger named Rick. I started with the only place that had ever connected them, the marina at Lake Reece. The old harbor master was gone, but records remained. Names, wages, work logs. In a dusty file cabinet at the back of the marina office, I found it. Rick Mathers, seasonal dockhand, hired May 2005. The name jolted me like an electric current. Mathers. It sounded ordinary enough, but seeing it there, written in smudged ink, turned my stomach. I called the RCMP detachment that had handled Aaron's case 20 years ago. The desk sergeant remembered nothing, but the archives hadn't been digitized then, so I requested the paper files. 2 days later, I was sitting at my dining table surrounded by yellowing reports, photographs, and witness statements. That's when I saw it, a brief, half-page note buried in the appendix. A fisherman named Paul Denton had reported seeing a man carrying what looked like an injured boy near the North Woods Trail the morning after the explosion. Denton had assumed it was a rescue. No one followed up. The note was stamped non-actionable. My pulse pounded as I read the date. The 19th of July, 2005. The same day they told us they'd found Aaron's body. Rick Mathers had clocked out of work 2 days earlier and never returned. No forwarding address. No next of kin. Just vanished. The police had chalked it up to coincidence. Seasonal workers came and went all the time. But now, 20 years later, the pattern was undeniable. A missing drifter. A body misidentified. A boy declared dead. A survivor raised in isolation. It wasn't an accident. It was a theft of a life. When I told Aaron what I'd found, he went silent. He stared at the floor, jaw tight. So, he planned it, he said, finally. He took me and made everyone think I was gone. I nodded, throat tight. The horror wasn't just in the taking, it was in how easy it had been, how no one had questioned it. Not the coroner, not the police, not even me. Rick Mathers hadn't just stolen my son. He'd erased him. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call Linda. We hadn't spoken properly in over a decade. She'd built a new life in Kamloops with a man named Peter, a retired firefighter. They had a tidy house, a garden, and from what I'd heard, peace, the kind I'd never been able to give her. Still, she answered on the second ring. Her voice was cautious. Michael? Linda, I said softly. I need to see you. It's about Aaron. I may why. I may why. I may why. I may why. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, don't do this. I'm not, I said. Please. Just let me come, she agreed, reluctantly. When I arrived the next afternoon, she looked smaller than I remembered. Older, of course, but still beautiful, in a fragile way. Her hands shook as she poured tea. You can't keep reopening this wound, she said. We've both done that too many times. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my pocket and slid a photo across the table. It was the picture I'd taken 2 nights earlier. Aaron, sitting on the porch, sunlight catching his hair. For a moment, she didn't react. Then, her hand flew to her mouth. No, she whispered. No. That's not. It's him, I said. We did a DNA test. 99.9%. Her teacup rattled against the saucer. That's impossible. He was alive, Linda. All this time. Rick Mathers took him. Tears welled in her eyes before she even realized she was crying. She pushed back her chair, pacing, shaking her head. You should have known, she said suddenly, turning on me. You always said something felt off. But you buried it. You let them tell us. He was dead. Her voice broke on the last word. I know, I said quietly. I should have fought harder. She sank back into the chair, sobbing now, the years of grief and guilt cracking open like ice in spring. I wanted to reach for her, but didn't. Some distances can't be closed. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears. Can I see him? She asked. Yes, I said. Tomorrow. She nodded slowly, her expression somewhere between terror and hope. I've dreamed of this for 20 years, she whispered. But I don't know how to wake up from it. Aaron moved into the house at the start of August. I told him it was temporary until he figured out what he wanted to do next. But the truth was, I couldn't stand the thought of him leaving. I cleared out the guest room, washed the sheets, stocked the fridge with things he used to love. Macaroni, orange soda, blueberry jam. It was strange, learning to share space again. The first few days were tentative, polite. We circled each other like strangers, pretending to be family. But slowly, cracks began to show. The nights were the hardest. I'd hear him thrashing in his sleep, muffled gasps, breaking through the walls. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the edge of his bed at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, eyes wild. It's okay, I'd tell him, handing him water. You're safe. He'd nod but never meet my eyes. Other times, the anger came sudden, sharp. A door slammed too hard, a plate dropped in the sink, and he'd snap, rage flaring out of nowhere, only to disappear just as quickly. I'm sorry, he'd mumble each time. I don't know why I do that. Daughter fanned us. I tried to be patient. But patience is easier in theory than in practice. Once, I reached out to steady him when he stumbled on the back steps. He jerked away like I'd burned him. Don't touch me, he shouted. The look on his face, fear, shame, cut me deeper than the words. Later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the clock ticking too loudly, and wondered if love was something you could relearn after 20 years of absence. We tried to build routines. I taught him how to use a smartphone. He taught me how to cook an omelet without burning it. We watched old home movies together. He cried quietly during one where he was 10, chasing Buster through the yard. I remember this, he whispered. I remember being happy. That night, he hugged me for the first time. It was awkward and stiff, but it meant everything. Still, there were moments when guilt gnawed at me because no matter how hard I tried, I didn't know how to father a man who'd lost half his life. He wasn't my 15-year-old boy anymore, and I wasn't the same father he remembered. We were two ghosts, trying to learn how to live again. Eventually, I did what any father would. I called the police. Detective Renee Torres from the RCMP drove down from Vancouver, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who didn't waste words. We sat in my living room while Aaron told his story, voice steady but distant. Torres took notes without interrupting, her pen scratching across the pad. When he finished, she closed the notebook and said quietly, "We'll reopen the case." For a few weeks, there was movement calls, follow-ups, files requested from archives. Then one afternoon she showed up again, hat in hand, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Weston," she said. "We found him." My heart stopped. "Rick Mathers?" She nodded. "Deceased. Drowned in the Willamette River, Oregon. 6 years ago. No next of kin. The body was found by hikers. Local police identified him through fingerprints. I didn't know whether to feel relief or rage. Torres handed me a small envelope. Inside were photocopies of the inventory from Mathers's possessions. A rusted pocket knife, a lighter, a leather wallet, and one item that made my hands tremble. A photo of Aaron at 15. The picture had been folded and refolded until the edges tore. But it was unmistakable. His school portrait, the one that used to sit on our mantel. He carried it with him, Torres said softly. We found it in his jacket pocket. Aaron stared at the photo for a long time, his jaw tight. Why would he keep it? He whispered. No one answered. Maybe guilt. Maybe ownership. Maybe he couldn't let go of the life he'd stolen. Torres sighed. Legally, the case closes here. The man responsible is dead. There's no prosecution possible. I nodded, though the words landed like a final blow. There would be no justice, no trial, no answers beyond what Aaron remembered. Rick Mathers had taken everything from us and vanished into the dark, leaving only ghosts in his wake. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sun go down. Aaron came out and handed me a beer. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "He's gone, Dad." I nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "But somehow, he's still everywhere." Therapy wasn't my idea. It was Aaron's. One morning he came downstairs, holding a brochure he'd picked up from the community center. Trauma Recovery Program, it read. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but his voice was steady. "I think I need help remembering," he said. I drove him to his first session that same afternoon. The therapist, Dr. Melanie Chu, specialized in memory reconstruction after long-term trauma. She was kind, but direct, the kind of person who could look at you and see what you weren't saying. The sessions were twice a week at first. Aaron came home drained every time, like he'd run a marathon in his mind. Slowly, fragments began to surface, snapshots of a life lived under someone else's rules. He'd remember Rick sitting at the edge of the bed, calling himself Dad, forcing Aaron to repeat it until it sounded natural. "He told me I'd made him proud," Aaron said one night. "When I cried, he'd say crying was for the life I didn't have anymore." He rubbed his temples. "He taught me to forget, and I did. I forgot everything that made me." His voice cracked on the last word. One evening, after another brutal session, he lashed out. "You didn't find me," he said suddenly, eyes blazing. "You knew something was wrong and you just buried it. You moved on." The words hit harder than any punch could have. I didn't defend myself. I couldn't. He was right. I had buried the doubt because the alternative was too unbearable. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have torn the world apart looking for you." He stared at me, trembling. Anger and grief tangled in his face. Then he broke. "I know it's not your fault," he said through sobs. "But some part of me still hates that you didn't come." I reached for him, and this time, he didn't pull away. We sat on the couch, two broken men, bound by 20 years of silence, crying for everything we'd lost, the years, the memories, the people we might have been. Healing didn't come in a wave. It came in inches, slow, uneven, and real. Every week, Aaron remembered a little more. Some things he wished he hadn't. Others brought comfort. But every memory he reclaimed was a small act of defiance against the man who had tried to erase him. Rebuilding the past was one thing. Facing the present was another. The world Aaron returned to barely resembled the one he left. He stared at smartphones like they were alien technology, laughed in disbelief at self-checkout lanes, and froze the first time he saw a car parallel park itself. "It's like I fell asleep in one century and woke up in another," he said. I tried to help, showed him how to text, how to pay bills online, how to navigate social media, but it overwhelmed him. "Everyone's shouting," he said after scrolling through Facebook for 5 minutes. "No one's listening." He started taking walks around town, sometimes disappearing for hours. One afternoon he came back pale, holding a brochure from the local high school. "They still have the memorial," he said quietly. There was a plaque by the front entrance. "In loving memory of Aaron Weston, 1,992,005. Someone had placed fresh flowers there that week. "They think I'm still dead," he said, voice hollow. "And in a way, I guess they're right. It's not day." That night, he told me he wanted to reclaim his name, legally, officially. The process was more complicated than either of us imagined. 20 years of being deceased wasn't easy to undo. There were forms, background checks, court petitions. We had to provide DNA records, witness statements, and proof of identity for a man the government no longer recognized. Every appointment reopened old wounds. "You understand this is highly unusual," one clerk said. "People don't usually come back from the dead." Aaron managed a tired smile. "Guess I'm not most people." Weeks turned into months. Eventually, he got a new birth certificate, a new ID card, with his real name, Aaron Weston. The day it arrived, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for a long time. "It doesn't feel real," he said finally. "It feels like someone else's life I'm pretending to live." I didn't know what to say. How could I? He'd missed 20 years of the world, 20 years of technology, music, politics, everything. But what he hadn't missed, what somehow endured, was his will to belong again. And as he held that ID card in his shaking hands, I realized that for the first time since the night he came back, he wasn't just surviving, he was beginning to exist. I was cleaning out the attic one Saturday morning when I found it a sealed cardboard box shoved behind an old trunk. The handwriting on the label stopped me cold. Aaron's room. The ink had faded, but the slanted letters were unmistakable. I hadn't seen that box since the summer after the funeral. I'd packed it away when Linda moved out, too afraid to open it. Dust puffed into the air as I lifted the lid. Inside were fragments of a childhood comic books, a broken slingshot, a baseball glove so small it looked impossible that my grown son had ever worn it. At the very bottom, folded and yellowed, was an envelope addressed to Dad. My throat tightened as I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, written in Aaron's crooked handwriting. "Dear Dad, if you ever find this, I want you to know something. I love you. But I don't want to stay here forever. I want to see the world. Go somewhere. Nobody knows me. Maybe even start over. Don't be mad. I just want to live big before life gets boring." The letter was dated a month before the accident. For a long moment I just stared at it, the words blurring through tears I didn't know were coming. I took it downstairs and found Aaron in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, reading the paper. "I found something," I said. He looked up, wary at first, then curious. I handed him the letter. As he read, his expression shifted from surprise to sadness to something softer. "I wrote this?" he whispered. I nodded. "You did. 14 years old, dreaming of running away and seeing the world." He exhaled, a shaky sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Guess I got my wish, huh? Just not the way I thought." His voice cracked, and for the first time in weeks, I saw him cry not from pain or fear, but from the unbearable weight of remembering who he'd been. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You were a boy who wanted to see the world," I said. "And you did. You just got lost on the way home." He smiled faintly through the tears. "That letter, yellowed and fragile, became a bridge, a link between the boy we lost and the man who'd come back. And for the first time, I realized they weren't separate people. They were one and the same. My son, still finding his way." We drove to the cemetery on a cool autumn morning, the kind where the air smells like wet leaves and endings. Aaron was quiet the whole ride, staring out the window as the landscape blurred past. When we reached the gates, he hesitated before stepping out, as if unsure he had the right to be there. We followed the winding path until we reached it, the small granite headstone, shaded by an old maple tree. Aaron Weston, 1,992,005. Forever loved, never forgotten. Someone, maybe Linda, had left fresh flowers beside it. For a long time neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the faint scent of rain. Aaron knelt, tracing his fingers over the carved letters of his name. "It's strange," he said finally. "Standing over your own grave." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "Feels like looking at a ghost that never should have existed." I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "We can have it removed," I offered quietly. "The stone, the plaque, whatever you want." He shook his head. "No. Let him rest." He stood then, brushing dirt from his knees. "The boy who died that day, he's part of me, but he's not me anymore. That version of me, he didn't make it off the lake. I did, and I have to live for both of us." The simplicity of it broke me. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "He'd be proud of you," I said. Aaron looked at me, and for the first time since he'd come back, I saw peace in his eyes. "I think I'm finally proud of me too," he said softly. We stayed there until the sun dipped low, the sky fading from gold to violet. When we finally turned to leave, Aaron looked back one last time. "Goodbye," he murmured. Not to the grave, not to the boy beneath it, but to the 20 years lost to the dark. As we walked back to the car, the silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, final. For the first time since that night at the door, I felt something close to peace. The past hadn't released us, but we'd learned how to live with it, and somehow, that was enough. 6 months passed, quietly and quickly. The house felt strange without Aaron in it, but in a good way. Like silence, had finally turned into something gentle, instead of empty. He'd found an apartment on the edge of town, a small place above a bookstore that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. It suited him. He'd gotten a job at a wildlife sanctuary north of the city, working with injured animals. The first time he told me about releasing a rehabilitated hawk back into the wild, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. It felt like letting go of something heavy. He said. I knew what he meant. Every Sunday, we had breakfast together. Sometimes at his place, sometimes at mine. He'd insist on cooking eggs, pancakes, burnt bacon. We'd talk about everything and nothing. The weather, work, the Blue Jays, ordinary things that once felt impossible. There were still hard days, moments when the shadows of the past crept back in, but they came less often now. The nightmares had softened into restless dreams. The anger had turned into quiet resolve. He was learning to live, really live, and I was learning how to stop being afraid every time the phone rang. One Sunday morning in early spring, we were sitting by the window, coffee mugs between us, sunlight slanting across the table. He looked different, stronger, calmer, more sure of himself. Out of nowhere, he said, "Thanks for sticking with me." I smiled. That's what fathers do. He hesitated for a beat, then said it, the word I hadn't heard from him since he was 15. "I know, Dad." Just that. Simple. Certain. But it hit me like a wave. I turned away, pretending to sip my coffee so he wouldn't see the tears. Outside, a pair of sparrows landed on the railing, chirping softly before taking flight again. Life moving forward, as it always does. Later, as I drove home, I thought about everything we'd lost, and everything we'd somehow found again. The ache was still there, but it was softer now, threaded with something that almost felt like grace. I buried a son 20 years ago. Last week, a man came back to me. Not the same boy, but still my son. And this time, I'm not letting go. This story was intense. But this story, on the right-hand side, is even more insane.